Of course, we are privileged to have a Minister of Industry and Defence with us, Minister Pyne. The format of the rest of the session will be very much an interactive Q&A, and I know that you'll be eager to ask questions. There will be roving mics to allow you to be heard by everyone. But perhaps to get things started, before we get to the first question, could I perhaps direct my question to the Minister, given that you were the Minister of Education before and that you are now Defence and Industry, and mention this in your address, that the human capital dimension is an important one in building the ecosystem that all three speakers have talked about as critical. What are your views about the shortcomings or perhaps the challenges ahead in terms of building the capability for the defence industry?
In terms of skills, you mean, Pascal?
Skills, yep.
Well, the skills part of the jigsaw puzzle is probably the most challenging part. As we saw today in the PISA results, that were released, Australian students are doing ever worse in terms of mathematics and science and even English. So in spite of increasing spending on education by 50% in the last 10 years, our results continue to go backwards, but it's very hard to convince a lot of people in the education sector that money isn't the only answer in terms of education, that there's a lot of other things as well. So we have to, over the next 5 years, actually build a skills base locally. If we don't, we'll have to import it from Europe and the United States and elsewhere, because we need the mathematicians, the engineers, the scientists, the highly skilled workers in the shipbuilding and submarine building, or the project won't be able to go ahead. That won't be because the government wants to bring people from overseas. It'll be because we haven't got enough. So I think we need to have a very close collaboration between our three universities here and the TAFE sector and other players in the vocational education and training sector, and that is beginning. But rather than seeing it as a competition in lots of ways, we have to see what the strengths are in each of the institutions. We're fortunate, while our TAFE sector in South Australia hasn't got enough money because of the South Australian government, it's still very high quality. And of course we have three very high quality universities, and the three universities do slightly different things. So that's a good start in terms of a collaboration rather than a competition. And I think it can be done. We will announce in February, March, we'll release the Naval Shipbuilding Plan. A significant component of that will be skills and workforce, and we will have an announcement that I can't tell you about today because you can't have all the good news all the time. We will have an announcement about how the Commonwealth's going to assist in terms of infrastructure around skills to help build that workforce. I'm confident we can do it, but we're not going to be able to do it in 2021 to start submarines in 2022. We need to be doing it in 2017 because it'll take us that long in order to get the numbers. We certainly have a lot of people who have these skills, by the way, but we need to get the numbers up. So when people, the media talk about redundancies at Osborne and the workforce losing their jobs, that is certainly of great interest to the government, and we're trying to bridge that valley of death. But actually the greater challenge is building the workforce that goes from 1,800 to 5,200 in 5 years. That is not an easy thing to do, and that's why we're working with people like Huntington Ingalls Industries to see how that's been done, and I'm confident we can do it, but it will all start with us actually all sitting down and saying, well, which bit are you going to do and which bit can you do and which bit will the Commonwealth support, etc.
Thank you, Minister. Would any one of the panel members want to add something?
I guess what?
It will be when you start talking about the Commonwealth.
Fantastic.
There you go.
So one of the things that I think I think we need to shift some of the conversations around trying to simply attract people and children, kids, into maths and the technical subjects. I think the conversation has to shift a little bit to careers, to opportunities. So that's one of the things we're looking at and considering is how do you influence the conversations that mums and dads are having with their kids about what the future looks like. And if you can influence those conversations, then the pathway is typically STEM, then I think that follows.
Okay.
And,
Mike?
and that also our sector is agile enough that we can reach into utilities or energy to cross-level from time to time, that you're not dedicated to a defence career your entire life, although some might be, as Sean suggested, but that we've got some ability to cross-level nationally. I think that's part of the solution as well. Yep.
Thank you very much. We'll go to our first question, which is somewhere in there.
Hello, I'm John Viskick from Fraser Nash Consultancy. This is a bit of a home reunion for me because my software skills came from Adelaide University, and for many years I worked at Holden Hill, which is in Minister Pyne's electorate, and Sharon and Mike are both colleagues of mine. I have a question about agility, industry agility. I noticed a few months ago that Secretary Ash Carter went to Silicon Valley saying, we need to work with you guys. And it was curious to me because defence is a very risk-averse, ponderous client in the US and in Australia. The agenda that the government has set now means that we have to be really responsive and really quick. And I'm pleased to see that decisions are being turned around very quickly within CASG, and they're holding to schedule, which hasn't always been the case. So I was just wondering on your guidance as to what industry can do to be more agile and more responsive to exploit the opportunity that the government's given us and be responsive in much more quicker time than that's been our recent experience.
Thank you for the question. Who would like to address that? Sharon?
So maybe I'll have a little shot at that, John, thank you. One of the conversations I've been having with service providers is to say, let's not look at the same method of delivery that you've always done. I think the workforce of the future is going to look very different to the workforce of the past, and going back to attracting workforce to Australia is that may not be a long-term solution for that person to be here. It may be just a short-term solution. And so I think we need to embrace virtual working more. I think we need to look at employment, the way that we employ people. Certainly, do we need to really build within one organisation a workforce, or is it multiple organisations to deliver a workforce? The way that people want to work in the future, flexible working, working around families, and attracting diversity in thought, as well as gender and in sector, to defence is actually part of that. And I think that's the challenge, is to move us from a fairly old-fashioned way of working in terms of workforce strategy into maybe a little bit more modern approach.
Thank you. Mike?
I'd build on that, JV, by saying, and I think you know this, that healthy Australian defence industry is a diversified Australian defence industry, and there's sort of two dimensions. You're either working some days of the week for defence and then in other sectors domestically, or more commonly, perhaps in our sector, you're sitting in export and global supply chains and diversifying to other defence clients in other parts of the world. That diversity, I think, has been a business choice, a business driver for Australian industry for a while. The barrier to it has been that we've made it hard for people, for various national security and other reasons, to jump across from working in energy to defence, and we've got to get better at that. We've got to reduce those internal barriers that stop us from moving workforce from useful, productive work in one part of our economy to defence. And if we can get better at that, then we'll be able to grow in the manner that the Minister is asking of us.
Thank you very much. Another question over there?
Pascal, I might just
Yes,
comment very briefly on that. I think the government can help by being consistent and by being stable. I think business will invest and realise that there's a change in the air when they actually see money flowing and that the government's not going to change its mind. So I think the government can be very critical in helping business to make those kinds of decisions about where they're going to put their resources and the kinds of people they're going to hire by making a decision and sticking to it. So what we're trying to do in the last 6 months since the election is make decisions, as you say, with alacrity, and keep on schedule, keep things moving, so that business can rely on a body of evidence, if you like, of the government doing the right thing and actually making the decisions, signing the contracts, getting the money flowing, not just making announcements, but actually having things happen, so that business will then say, right, well, there has been a change in attitude. The government isn't going to suddenly change its mind. The heft of the $195 billion will be spent in the way it's being described, and then I think business will follow where the money is.
Thank you. Yes, over there.
Thank you. Rick Carney. Minister, I have a question for you, but firstly can I say, I've heard you publicly state you don't have many friends in Canberra, but let me tell you, you have a lot of friends in South Australia.
Well, that's where my electorate is, that helps.
Minister, early this year, the Chief of the Navy, Vice Admiral Tim Barrett, was quite open about the problems the Navy has had in getting properly trained submariners to crew the Collins-class submarines. Now, I know the Navy's put some strategies in place, such as the deliberately differentiated employment conditions, which I understand's a metaphor for paying a bucket load more of money to them. But given we've got 12 subs coming, are you and your federal government confident that the Navy has sufficient strategies in place to ensure going forward we don't have a repeat of having insufficient numbers of submariners to man the new submarines?
Well, thank you, Rick. And I might also, since I mentioned my electorate, I should recognise that Senator David Fawcett, and whose electorate we are also at in South Australia, is here, and I didn't know that he was here before, so I'd acknowledge him. And David Ridgway as well, from the Legislative Council, and the leader of the Liberal Party in the Legislative Council is here too. I didn't know you were here too, so sorry, David. And if there's anybody else that I've missed, put your hand up. And Christophe Lecourtier, I should also recognise the ambassador from France who is here with us. In terms of the submariners, well, it's always been hard getting submariners because it's an area of Defence Force that is it's a trying and difficult area. So we did run a recruitment campaign last year that Maurice Payne was responsible for just for submariners, which I understand has been reasonably successful. But this is where defence needs to be agile, obviously, Rick. And if the market is telling you that people won't work on a particular but necessary part of the business, then you have to find the ways that will get them to work in that part of the business, which is usually remuneration and conditions. People will work for national pride, and in times of emergency they'll work for the safety of the nation, and they'll do that at certain prices in the market. But when there isn't an existential threat, then they're more likely to want to be properly remunerated and have decent conditions. So that is the job of Rear Admiral Barrett, and we have till the late 2020s, as Sean mentioned, for the first submarines to be in the water for trials, etc. The first submarines won't actually be operational, I think, till the early 2030s. So we have time, but it is an important priority because we're taking us from 6 regionally superior submarines to 12 regionally superior submarines. So we've had difficulty finding the workforce for 6, then it's going to be obviously twice as hard finding it for 12.
We have another question, someone to the front.
Hello. Margot Forster, Defence Teaming Centre. My comment is following on from points made.
Not standing up.
Sorry.
We can see you now. Can see you.
My point is following on from a few comments that Sharon has made in relation to the need to look at doing things differently, and in the context of workforce, and where are we going to get it and how are we going to get it quickly. So I would like to make the observation that each year 30,000 people apply to join the Defence Force for varying reasons, the money, the adventure, national pride. And only about 5,000 of those people get a job. And we really should think about capitalising on that demonstrated commitment and be there ready to say, we don't have a job for you in a uniform, but we have a pathway for you to be part of this important commitment and be more proactive in engaging the people on their way out of the recruiting centre, having got the bad news, and then into a TAFE program, into a university program, into industry. So there's not really a question there, it's more of an observation.
Great idea.
It's not really a question, and I agree with you.
Unanimity on the panel, which is a rare thing. Thank you for
That's
that.
a good start, Margot, because you've only just taken over the Defence Teaming Centre, haven't you, as I understand? Day 3, excellent.
Day 3, well done.
Look
We have
forward to
another
working
question
with
over there.
David Barnes from Oricon. I want to build on a point that Mike Calmes talked about, which is how do we draw in the best of expertise from other sectors, because I think it is a big challenge in our industry, even some of the traditional, like we do a lot of work with defence, it's difficult to build on that. And so I suppose my question is for the Minister, because the government has a lot of influence in this, and I applaud the government's drive to maximise Australian industry opportunities. And I'd be really interested in sort of hearing a little bit more from on how the government intends to do that, and maybe sort of using the example of the announcement you made today of OMT about the process it's using to engage Australian industry.
Well, David, OMT is probably not the best example because we've engaged Odents because they have a particular specialty, which is planning shipyards. And that doesn't require a large workforce, but it requires a highly experienced and trained and skilled workforce, and that's why we've hired them to do it. So I can't imagine that there'll be a lot of Australians being employed by Odents to do the planning of the shipyard. But there are better examples. So with the Land 400 contract, for example, for the 225 armoured combat reconnaissance vehicles that Rheinmetall and BAE are bidding for, the initial instructions to them were that local content wasn't a priority. That changed with the election of the Turnbull government, and they have now gone back and started really again in lots of respects to find as many Australian businesses as possible that can be part of their global supply chain, in this case for these 225 vehicles. It's a $5 billion contract, and while it's unstated, I'm sure that Rheinmetall and BAE are both trying to maximise their Australian industry content because they can see that's one of the government's significant priorities. And so there will be a whole lot of businesses that previously wouldn't have had a look in that are now going through a very arduous workshop process with BAE and with Rheinmetall and with all of their other primes who are part of their operations like Saab and so on. They're happening right now. In fact, Matt Opie yesterday told me that they'd already had 450 individual business meetings around Australia from Brisbane to Adelaide to find out what's out there. As we heard from Sean Costello, they've had 145 businesses respond to their requests for Australian content, of which 25 have already passed all the tests. So there are kind of three categories of businesses. There's the businesses that are already providing the kind of quality and capability that Defence is very comfortable with. Think things like CEA phased array radar, obviously, Austal, more BAE, and then there are businesses, Lockheed Martin Australia, but there are businesses that are probably on the cusp of being able to provide the kind of capability that Defence requires. And that's why we've set up things like the Centre for Defence Industry Capability to give them the advice and support through a grants program, through the Defence Innovation Hub, the Next Generation Technologies Fund, to help lift those businesses over the hump to become completely able to be part of what Defence requires. And we also have the Defence Industrial Capability Plan coming out next year. all of those kinds of businesses can already look at the defence industry policy statement, the integrated investment plan and the defence white paper, because that all provides a lot of granular information about what we're looking for. And then there are lots of Australian businesses who want to be in defence industry, but quite frankly will not be in defence industry. And just because they make something that defence uses does not mean we'll be using that business. So we are not going to have a second-rate defence force because we want to have Australian industry involvement. So there will be disappointed people along the way who think, oh, because I make product X, defence will buy my product. Our number one priority is still the capability of our defence force. That is our number one priority. But whereas previously the attitude of defence in the successive governments was we're quite happy to be a foreign military sales country, 6th largest importer in the world of defence material and platforms, we're not satisfied with that anymore. We want to be a long way down the ladder of importers of defence material and platforms. We want to have a sovereign capability of our own. But it has to be the best in the world. So, for example, we just won another part of the maintenance and sustainment of the Joint Strike Fighter program, which I was in Washington about 6 weeks ago, and we announced about 3 weeks ago that we'd won the right to be the Asia Pacific hub for the componentry of the Joint Strike Fighters. We had already won the Asia Pacific hub for frames and engines. So this really sets us up in terms of aircraft and avionics for decades into the future. There'll be 3,000 Joint Strike Fighters in the world. It's the most potent air weapon in the world. And Australia is a partner nation. There are only 4 nations that won that right. US, was not hard for them to win, UK, the Netherlands and Australia. We beat South Korea, Singapore and Japan to be the Asia Pacific hub. So we have the capability, but it has to be a genuine capability. So part of my job is to help create and build that capability in the industry so that we can genuinely say, when I say to the Prime Minister, we have the best in the world for, say, the Joint Strike Fighters, it's true. It's not, oh, well, we're going to cut a few edges because we want to create a few jobs. That's not what we're doing. We actually want to have a genuinely best in the world in defence industry, and that's our great ambition and my passion.
Thank you, Mike.
Pascal, can I build on that a little, Chris? One of the really wonderful byproducts of that JSF program was this cohort of now globally competitive SMEs that, speaking to the Managing Director of Boeing last week, are genuinely globally competitive. He will take them to the US and he will support them as being supply chain ready against the very best in the world. That half dozen to a dozen companies is a good start. How do we learn from that and recreate a similar effect, but with 20 to 30, and this is why it's relevant to South Australia, Nigel, a 98% SME economy, how do we get 20 to 30 small businesses into that medium-sized bracket, globally competitive on the back of the 89 billion shipbuilding investment? That's the challenge. How do we find them and how do we grow them?
Thank you. Anybody else? Michael.
There is a piece of this that's that is related to the skills development to the education sector. One of the things, just with the JSF, we've been talking with an SME. It's Canberra-based at the moment. It's international partners. They're looking for people with radar expertise. Radar's not a big thing in universities, and we have a radar centre. It's been a little bit in decline, mainly because of retiring people. But in talking with the industry about what's going on in the over-the-horizon radar upgrade and their needs, and talking with what people are looking for in the EW space for JSF, there is a demand. Unless we hear that demand from industry, we're not really set up to respond. So we're just really looking for that kind of feedback from industry.
Thank you. Any other questions? I mean, one of the areas which I think is noticeable about the small SME situation is certainly going recently to Euronaval, the number of small companies that have made it their business to actually understand the needs of much larger industry and then serving that very well. So it is possible for a small SME economy to be responsive and collectively world-beating, I have to say. So that's the recipe we've got to find here. Another questions? Andy.
Minister Andy Keogh, Defence SA. Firstly, congratulations on all the work you're doing to energise the defence industry. It's certainly been much needed, and those people who have been in the industry for many decades will note that this is an unprecedented opportunity, and certainly the drive and energy we've seen, we haven't seen before. So congratulations for your role in that. My question is around this issue of confidence. At the macro level, the story is fantastic. There is wonderful opportunities, and we can all see those opportunities. But there seems to be a disconnect. And in fact, I was just at a small business forum when I talked about these defence opportunities. And the message is struggling to translate down to the small businesses out there across Australia about the opportunities that are going to be there, not just for them now, not just next month or next year, but for them into decades and for their children. What more can we do? You're playing your part. What more can particularly the people here do to improve the level of confidence about our ability to undertake this challenge and set ourselves up for this transformational change?
Well, Andy, I think that takes time, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is bring a sort of positivity and energy to the portfolio that encourages people to want to get involved. But the workshops that we've been having on offshore patrol vessels and future frigates have been amazingly oversubscribed. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of businesses have gone to, well over 1,000 actually. We had 400 in Melbourne, 500 in Sydney, 200 in Adelaide, 150 in Darwin, about 200 in Brisbane, 350 in Perth, and they're still going, these workshops, where the purpose of the workshop is CASG and the ship and submarine divisions explaining to business people from all sides, whether they're small or whatever, how to get involved with defence. Because defence is a hard being to be involved in, a hard unit to get involved with. They have very high expectations, and they haven't been particularly attuned to having a close engagement with industry. So the large primes are perfectly good at this because they have whole divisions who are responsible for engaging with their client, and there's only one client, which is us. So they give us tremendous service, I suppose, and I'm not worried about them. But the workshops have been very, very successful. Now, there are businesses that come to those workshops and go away and think, I can't do that. I stick with what I'm doing, it's all fine. There are others who think, well, if I do this, if I do that, if I bring this person on or change my business in a certain way, I think I can get into that sector, and that's what the purpose of this is. But the market will respond, of course, and in my example about Saab, young people are responding, going from 10 applications for 5 positions to 200 for 10 positions. People are starting to hear the story, and one of the reasons that Malcolm has brought me into this job is because I'm not shy about doing the media, and my job is to get out and talk about this all the time and make the most of every announcement, because it just keeps feeding that story that this is a great area of the economy to be in. And so I think we'll start seeing a lot more SMEs doing that. Now, we also have, of course, a process at the moment where we have a panel called CAS-S, which is, I don't even know what it stands for, a lot of acronyms in defence, but it's the Capability Acquisitions and Sustainment Group's interface with SMEs. It's got about 496 people on what is a very large panel. And at the moment we're discussing how to do that, how to reform that, and how we would go forward with it. But I think the way that groups like CEDA, or the Australian Industry Defence Network, or the AIG Defence Industry Group can assist is telling their members, whether it's through their newsletters or their emails or their conferences, that if you're not thinking about this area, that's your choice, but this is a great opportunity. Because the big difference in what we're doing now and what's happened before, there's been many white papers over the years. Stephen Martin and David Fawcett, for that matter, have seen more papers about defence than you can poke a stick at over our political careers. But this is kind of the first time when someone said, this is what we should do, and here's $195 billion. Right? And the Trump presidency, where he's described countries that don't spend 2% of their GDP on defence as strategic bludgers. We don't want to be bludgers, and we will reach 2% by 2020-21, which is great, but there are 4 countries in NATO out of 28 that spend 2%, and Australia will be soon spending 2%, and the US is our ally, and we want to be a country that can say we're not bludging off anybody, so this money will be spent, and this is the big difference. The heft is there now to make this happen. Whereas we've talked about it, and we went to your submarine conference in Canberra, it was packed to the rafters. What had to be one of your biggest conferences in years. So the interest, the buzz is there, and we have to turn that buzz into people holding on to tools and doing jobs. And that's part of my job, obviously.
Maybe I can have a go from a Prime's perspective in terms of the SMEs out here in Australia. I was the General Manager of the Global Supply Chain Programme for 5 years before taking on this role. So I know a lot of people in industry, and I know them by going and visiting them and understanding their capability. And we have got some awesome suppliers in Australia, and there's no doubt in that respect, and they are globally competitive, and we should be proud of those, because I am. We've also got others who have a sense of entitlement around orders. We talk about the money being there, they will sit there and expect that money just to flow. They don't want to work with others, they want to keep it to themselves. And quite often the person who formed that business actually becomes the stoppage to their progress. Okay. So I think it's a complicated answer to a simple question that says, how do you pull industry from where it is today, which is very stratified, very much commodity focused and maybe build-to-print focused, into something that's a lot higher up the food chain than where they are today. And that's where that enduring capability actually comes from, because that activity during acquisition is what gives sustainment capabilities in Australia, and that's what builds some of our awesome technologies that quite frankly have been developed over many years in Australia through technology transfer on major programs, and they're the levers we should be using both in industry and defence to say we need to build this capability in Australia. And so, SMEs are going to have to think differently about how they work together both with primes and with prime supply chains, because quite often that is where their work comes from, not direct from the primes.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, could I maybe just round it out? You said think differently. Andy, in our time in Canberra, there's different thinking in Russell now. There was a time not that long ago where to talk to the capability managers, those chiefs of service, those leaders in CASG, there wasn't much thought about industry until the contract was let. That's changed. I really think that the fundamental input to capability decision has caused a rethink as to how they consider those issues in Russell 1 and in the very senior ranks of defence, and that's also goodness. And they're educating themselves on how industry is an important part of their capability development process. So, we've got a tailing wind, Pascal.
Thank you very much. This is quite a good place to stop, to acknowledge that there is a real challenge ahead of us, but it's real. And by looking at the room, I can see that a lot of people are willing to really work collaboratively and make the most of the opportunity. Can I please ask the audience to thank our speakers for today?